Hello and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we've got some really weighty stuff to get into. It comes from a discussion we've been looking at on the Unseen Wisdom channel over on YouTube.
That's right. The specific video features Mandisa Mashego, and it's titled, "We Are Being Robbed." Pretty provocative title.
It certainly is. And, if you are watching along or check it out later, maybe give their video a like on the channel. And think about subscribing to the Unseen Wisdom, too.
Absolutely. They dig into some important topics. And of course, we always appreciate you joining us here for our take.
So our, let's say, mission for this deep dive is really to pull out the core arguments, the key insights from Ms. Mashego in that conversation.
Yeah, we want to understand her perspective on the challenges South Africa is facing and any potential solutions or changes discussed.
We're basically trying to distill the most crucial bits for you, save you some time, but still make sure you grasp the significant points being made.
And it's worth noting the source, right? It's not like a formal paper. It's a candid chat.
Exactly. Someone deeply involved, giving their firsthand views, some strong opinions. It feels very direct.
Definitely. Okay, so where should we start? Maybe with who Mandisa Mashego is, her background.
Good idea. So she might be known mostly as a political activist, a politician.
Right, but her actual professional background, the foundation, is 20 years as a public relations practitioner.
That's quite a long time. And probably shapes how she sees things, how she communicates.
You'd think so. It definitely informs her understanding of, public perception and messaging.
And her jump into politics, it wasn't just like a random career change.
No, she frames it as driven by a sense of societal responsibility. A belief, initially at least, that politics could be a vehicle for real positive change.
Initially. So has that view shifted?
Well, yeah, that's a key point she makes now. She's come to believe that politics is not the only way. Maybe not even the primary way sometimes.
Interesting evolution. And she's involved with the New Nation movement.
Yes, and she's clearly very passionate about electoral reform in South Africa. That seems to be a central theme for her.
Okay, so that passion for reform connects directly to her critique of the current system, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Her main argument, really the crux of it, is that the current electoral rules and policies are, largely to blame for what she sees as a serious lack of accountability and transparency.
She feels the government talks about transparency, but the reality is different.
Very different in her view. She basically says the government's branding of itself as transparent and accountable is, untrue. She points to public participation as an example.
How so? What's the issue there?
She argues it's often staged, like these community consultations sound good, but in practice.
They're not really reaching the whole community.
Right. She claims political parties mostly just invite their own members, their own supporters, not the broader public. So it looks like consultation, but it isn't genuine representative feedback.
Okay. That makes sense as a critique. And what about the recent changes to the Electoral Act? The ones about independent candidates?
Yeah, she has strong views on that, too. Firstly, she prefers calling them individual South African citizens, not just independents.
Okay, fair enough. But do the amendments help them?
Not nearly enough, according to her. She argues these individuals still face big hurdles. For instance, they can't even be on the same ballot paper as the party candidates.
Really? How does that work?
It basically segregates them, potentially making them less visible to voters. And she also points out there's no real functional constituency model.
Except for maybe allocating funds.
Exactly. That's the only aspect she sees working, but it doesn't translate into actual representation or accountability back to a specific area.
So the consequence of all this is that elected officials aren't truly answerable to the people in their supposed constituencies.
So that's her conclusion. Their loyalty, their accountability, it's primarily upwards to the party leadership, not outwards to the citizens. Parties can kind of act as they please without direct local consequences.
Which leads us to the need for systemic change, right? She must be advocating for something fundamentally different.
Oh, absolutely. There's a clear agreement in the discussion that, yes, drastic change is needed in how government operates, how it communicates, how it connects with people.
Does she offer any models or warnings?
Well, interestingly, she brings up the old apartheid-era constituency system. Not as something to copy, obviously, but as a cautionary tale.
How so?
Her point is that even if you have a constituency structure, it doesn't guarantee fairness if the laws underpinning the whole system are unjust. The operating model has to align with just laws.
Good point. Structure isn't enough on its own. Did she mention any positive examples?
Yes, she contrasted it with Switzerland. Specifically, their system after 1951, the coalition government approach.
In the referendums.
Exactly, the legislated use of referendums. It's not just optional, it's built into their system, especially for big financial decisions.
So citizens get a direct say. They own the decisions.
That's the idea she highlights. It ensures citizen ownership, particularly when it involves taxpayer money. It forces the government to get buy-in.
Okay, that's a clear contrast. Now, she also talked about the Public Service and Administration Act, didn't she? What were her concerns there?
Yeah, that was another significant point. She believes the act gives, maybe unintentionally, too much power to senior managers in government.
And that weakens accountability. How?
It kind of muddies the water between those senior managers and the political heads, the ministers or MECs. The lines of responsibility get blurred.
She mentioned something about the pre-election period, too.
Right. She explained that normally senior managers and the executive share responsibility. But just before an election, the state machinery sort of takes over the admin side.
And that's a risky period.
In her view, yes. She sees it as a time with a higher risk for, let's say, questionable spending or mismanagement, because the political oversight might be different.
And the act also plays into appointments.
That's a major concern for her. She argues the act makes it easier for politicians to deploy their preferred people into senior management roles, even if those roles should be filled strictly on merit.
Ah, so patronage appointments, basically.
That's the implication. And she connects this directly to enabling corruption and putting unqualified individuals into really important positions.
Which has knock-on effects, presumably.
Definitely. She talks about people essentially learning on the job in very senior roles and a lack of consistent professional development. It creates vulnerabilities.
Okay, this seems like a good point to transition into the really serious allegations about corruption she makes. This seemed quite central to the "we are being robbed" title.
Indeed, it gets pretty stark here. She alleges that widespread looting isn't just happening, but it's made worse by appointing foreign nationals, both potentially illegal and legal ones, into very sensitive government jobs.
Which kinds of jobs?
She mentions positions in security, the Treasury, the NPA, that's the National Prosecuting Authority.
Right, the prosecutors.
Yes, and even the courts, critical areas.
And her argument is, what? That their loyalty is questionable.
Essentially, yes. She raises the question of patriotism. Where do their primary allegiances lie when they aren't citizens but hold these crucial state roles?
Does she think South Africa lacks the skills domestically?
Quite the opposite. She's adamant that South Africa does have enough skilled citizens to fill these positions. She even sort of endorsed the U.S. approach of removing illegal immigrants and going after government corruption.
Did she share any personal experiences related to this?
She did. She mentioned being a whistleblower herself in a place she called Krung. Sounded like a provincial government setting.
And what did she allege happened there?
She described money being siphoned off through, like, bulk transfers, things like social relief grants, salary payments.
Oh.
She suggested sophisticated methods, possibly involving computer programmers or hackers manipulating the systems.
Wow. So not just dodgy procurement deals.
Exactly. This is beyond procurement. She also brought up the issue of ghost employees, people on the payroll who don't actually exist.
A classic problem.
Yes, and she's very skeptical when officials claim they've solved it, asking, well, where are the arrests? Where's the recovered money? Good questions.
Seems reasonable to ask. Were there other methods she mentioned?
Yeah, she described another alleged scam involving foreign nationals. They apparently set up companies, get government grants or loans. She named something called Kong Enterprise Propeller as an example.
Right.
And then they just disappear with the money.
And the money gets written off. How?
Because, she claims, they often use fraudulent ID documents, which, and this is a shocking part of her allegation, she says, are sometimes issued by corrupt elements within the government itself. So proper investigation becomes almost impossible.
That paints a picture of, well, deeply entrenched, systemic problems.
It really does. Very troubling allegations. She also connects the political system itself to this, talking about majority rule.
What's her point there? That having a huge majority is inherently bad.
Her perspective is that it can be dangerous. Even the best political system can be derailed when one party has too much power for too long. Power, she suggests, is intoxicating and can corrupt.
And what about the opposition parties in this scenario? Are they doing enough, in her view?
She critiques them as well, suggests they sometimes get distracted by maybe less important issues instead of laser focusing on the core problem, the stolen money.
She also mentioned something called budget vote buying. What does she mean by that?
It sounded quite cynical. like an unspoken understanding among politicians, maybe even across party lines, when it comes to allocating funds during budget votes, kind of looking after each other's interests.
But she thinks competition for positions is partly driven by access to illicit funds.
She suggests that yes, that the intense jockeying for power is sometimes fueled by the desire for opportunities to steal. It's a pretty bleak assessment of the motivations.
Wow. Okay. The conversation also touched on race, didn't it? How did that fit in?
Yes, there seemed to be agreement that historical issues like apartheid are incredibly important, but raising them can sometimes be used as a diversion, a way to deflect criticism about current corruption, especially when objective, merit-based systems aren't properly in place.
So it becomes a shield against accountability for present actions.
That's the idea discussed. If you don't have clear, objective standards, falling back on historical grievances can be a convenient way to sidestep difficult questions about current performance or integrity.
Makes sense. Then the discussion moved to taxation. What were the key points there?
She criticized what she sees as arbitrary tax increases, and particularly the failure to adjust tax brackets properly for inflation.
Fiscal drag, basically.
Exactly. It means people effectively pay more tax even if their real income hasn't increased. She sees it as squeezing taxpayers unfairly.
And this ties back to the system needing more checks and balances.
Yes. Her overall argument is that you need a much more robust, sophisticated system of governance, one that doesn't just rely on hoping politicians will be good.
Needs better guardrails, as she put it.
Precisely. She feels those guardrails are missing or inadequate in the current setup. She also pointed out how little power ordinary party members have to challenge wrongdoing within their own parties.
Because the Electoral Act focuses power at the top.
Right. It recognizes the party leadership primarily, making it very difficult for rank-and-file members or even concerned MPs to hold their own colleagues or leaders accountable, even for really egregious behavior.
So people can get away with a lot.
That's her assertion. It makes public representatives largely untouchable by their supposed constituents or even their own party structures, unless the top leadership decides to act.
Okay, but there's always the counter-argument, isn't there? That the laws are there, the mechanisms do exist.
Right. The problem isn't the laws, it's the enforcement argument, or the individuals involved.
Yeah. How does she respond to that?
She pushes back hard. She maintains the existing frameworks are just not adequate. She dismisses claims of transparency as superficial.
What about things like the Auditor General's reports? Don't they show accountability?
She sees the AG as mainly reporting after the fact. Identifying the problems, yes, but without real teeth or automatic consequences for those implicated. It's information, but not necessarily action.
And she was skeptical about things like the VAT increase being necessary.
Yes, she questioned the genuineness, suggesting it might have been, a bit of a smokescreen or even deceptive.
Yeah.
She also brought in some historical context about labor broking.
Oh, yeah. What was that point?
She recalled that the apartheid government had apparently resisted labor broking because they worried it would displace local workers.
And then post-1994.
It was implemented, and she links that decision to some of the current economic problems and job market issues.
Her overall tone towards those she holds responsible sounds quite harsh.
Extremely. She labels their actions as criminal, straight up. She really doesn't mince words, and she keeps coming back to the idea that the accountability frameworks just aren't working effectively.
And for any new system to work, what needs to happen first?
She insists you have to clean up the criminal justice system. Tackle the rot there, otherwise nothing else will stick.
She also mentioned ministerial security.
Yeah, the huge cost, and the fact that it pulls police officers away from actual community policing where they're desperately needed. Another example of skewed priorities, in her view.
And the porous borders issue came up again?
Yes, linking it back to people with fraudulent documents getting into government positions, creating vulnerabilities.
She used a pretty strong analogy to describe the country's state.
The sewer or dump, yeah. Very graphic. To emphasize that the problems are systemic, deep, not just about potholes or load shedding, but something more fundamental.
And the hypocrisy of leaders ignoring laws?
That too. Leaders expecting citizens to follow rules that they themselves seem to flout. It erodes trust completely.
So her solution involves changing governing parties?
Well, she suggests that because there isn't a proper merit-based system, changing parties periodically might be necessary. But she also warns that the current system can corrupt even good individuals who enter it.
And being a whistleblower is dangerous.
Clearly. She highlighted the risks involved. implying it takes immense courage and often comes at great personal cost.
Towards the end, the conversation turned to the new Government of National Unity, the GNU.
Yes, discussing how it's already being tested, particularly around budget issues, and mentioning reports that some factions, maybe former comrades, want certain parties like the DA and Freedom Front Plus removed.
Why would they want that, according to the discussion?
The speculation voiced was that removing those parties might make it easier to continue with or enable further malfeasance, less scrutiny, perhaps.
And she brought it back to the Electoral Act again.
Always. She stressed again that you need that core framework, the Electoral Act, to properly guide the whole environment and ensure elected officials are accountable. It's not just about running the election day itself.
Without it, citizens have little power over who represents them.
Very little direct power, she argues. You can't easily influence party lists. You can't recall someone problematic without costly court action. It's very disempowering for the average citizen.
She mentions specific examples of high-level figures facing allegations.
Yeah, she referred to a deputy president with numerous allegations against him and how that compromises the position of his superior, the president.
And even people allegedly involved in the 2021 looting.
Now leading political parties.
Yeah.
A very stark observation about the current political landscape.
Finally, she raised concerns about national security.
Yes, specifically the state of the Army's aircraft fleet, and questioning the country's overall defense readiness, adding another layer to the picture of systemic issues.
Wow, okay, that was a lot to cover. A really comprehensive critique from Mandisa Mashego's perspective as shared on The Unseen Wisdom.
Definitely comprehensive and outlining some incredibly serious challenges for South Africa. It's heavy stuff.
It really is. And if you, listening, found this breakdown useful, please do give us a thumbs up or a like wherever you're listening or watching.
Yeah, and drop a comment maybe. What are your thoughts on these issues? We'd be interested to hear. And subscribing to the deep dive means you won't miss our future explorations.
We genuinely hope that digging into these perspectives from the unseen wisdom helps you get a clearer picture of the complex realities being discussed.
Our goal isn't to overload you, but to give you those key insights, those aha moments, efficiently.
Exactly. So maybe a final thought to leave you with, building on everything we've heard.
Considering these deep systemic problems, the electoral system, accountability, corruption, all of it.
What single fundamental change do you think would make the biggest positive difference for South Africa's future?
It's a tough question, but worth mulling over after hearing all this. What's the key leverage point?
Definitely something to reflect on. Thank you so much for tuning in and spending your time with us for this deep dive.
Yes, thank you. We'll catch you next time.